If you're like me, you probably read the news on a regular basis. And if you're like me, one of the things that you'll always notice stands out is there's something in the news having to do with travel, something in the news having to do with a destination, and some really big red flag about why you should not go to a certain destination or what you should base your travel around. There's all sorts of opinion pieces out there. There's all sorts of headlines and topics that you should be looking at and trying to read between the lines. And not all of it's super exciting, but a lot of it is relevant. And today we're going to dig into that. You know, there's a lot of things in the news that have a tendency to excite me, and there's a lot of things in the news that have a tendency to really depress a person. Now, I try not to get too depressed about things. I like to believe that, there's nothing really new in the world other than technology, of course, but there's no real scenarios in the world that are super new to the human experience, right? So when we talk about a depressed society, when we talk about going to a certain location, when we talk about certain human behaviors, I don't necessarily consider that those are all new things about human nature. I think those are just things that have always existed in people, that those types of scenarios have always existed in certain locations, and those types of scenarios that just exist across the board and change locations, but they're nothing really new. I think that all the time, right? I'll be looking in the news and I'm going through articles and I'm paying attention to certain things, and I see a lot of opinion pieces come up. I see a lot of breaking news come up, and usually it's something that's sometimes they're really interesting, and other times they're like, man, where the hell are these people getting this information? This is obviously opinion only, no fact behind it. It's just some blog writer who's just saying, hey, this is what you got to do before you go here. This is what you got to do. Are we all like that in the blog writing industry? Yeah, to some degree, but hopefully most of us actually do our homework on what we're talking about. If I'm going to write a piece about the best foods to give you energy while you're out there walking around the city, I'm going to do a little bit of research. I'm going to dig into it. I'm going to find what types of fruits give you the best energy, what types of affordable foods like fruits, nuts, little things like that, things to stay away from. So you should be doing a little bit of research. And I'm not saying that research doesn't exist across the board, because of course there is a lot of research provided into some of these articles, but a lot of them too, they're just information being thrown out there. And let's just be honest, as far as travel goes and as far as event planning, anything like that goes, anything having to do with what Planiversity specializes in, there's a lot of things that we can find relevance and conversation in, okay? And so as I'm digging through the news, I like to pay attention to these things, and I actually like to have an opinion. I also find that in my own head, I'm having these thoughts, these conversations like, oh man, that doesn't really sound right, or that's actually a really good idea. I like the fact that this person brought that up. And of course, for those depressing pieces of news and information, I'm always thinking like, man, that's a shame. It's too bad that we got to this point. It's too bad that the situation is what it is, and hopefully it gets better, blah, 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 and then when of course there's good news about certain things, like I love reading those topics on, best communities to retire in. Because then you get to learn about what areas of the country that you live in, or maybe even around the world, are affordable. They have an abundant, amount of doctor offices, pharmacies, dental offices. There's certain areas that are extremely depressed and not worth going to. There's certain areas that are, especially now we're talking 2022 moving into 2023, that are peaking in crime rates, that I'm not going to be one of those people that pretends that is not happening. I am 100% on board. I'm looking at this. I'm paying attention. Politics aside, crime is a serious thing, and crime is definitely going to affect whether or not tourism is embraced at a certain location or not. You know, I can remember a certain time when Johannesburg, South Africa was voted like the most dangerous city in the world, right? You know, if there's a city or a location that has that kind of title, it's going to impact tourism. All right. Nobody's going to want to go there. Not a lot of people are going to want to go to a location where they think the chances of them having some kind of significant event are going to dramatically increase. I know I wouldn't want to, and I feel pretty confident in most surroundings, but I know I wouldn't want to go to a certain destination if I thought that the odds of me being out after a certain time of the night were really great that I'm going to get, robbed, stabbed, my car broken into, something like that. But that's not all that travel news has to offer. You know, there's also op-ed pieces. There's also informative pieces. And I started pulling up to news articles, and I thought, that could be a really interesting way for Planiversity to go. Is that we start looking at the news, we start kind of digging into it, we see what people are saying out there, and then we just kind of share our ideas on it and thoughts on it. So hope you got a cup of coffee. I know I do. Freshly topped off. So let's go ahead and let's dig into this. All right. The first thing that I want to take a look at is going to be this article from Travel and Leisure titled 5 Things You Should Do for Your Health Before Every Trip, according to a doctor. Of course, I had to put that according to a doctor in it. That right there is them trying to establish some kind of credibility, right? Because if it was 5 things you should do for your health before every trip, according to Lisa or Brandon, random Lisa or random Brandon, then people would probably be like, this is a lot of opinion. There's not much benefit to reading this other than it might be interesting based on the way it's written, based on the imagery, whatever. But, who knows how credible it is deep down. Well, let's take a look at it. So, I like reading articles like this because it spurs and it inspires thoughts, right? And I might not take it as gospel. I might not look at an article like this and say, oh yeah, definitely, this is how I'm going to start living my life. This is how I'm going to start traveling. Before every trip, I'm going to start doing these things. But no. But if I start to notice a trend, if I start to see these types of things popping up in articles all over the place, and more medical professionals talking about these things that you should be doing, yeah, of course, I'm going to start thinking a little bit more about it. But I never take something as gospel. I never take it as an absolute. I look at these things and I like the thoughts that they encourage in my own head. I like them as discussion points, and I really like the thought of considering things, on a personal level, and so when I start scrolling through this, point number 1 for them, drink lots of water, right? Drink lots of water. Well, that should be just anything in life, but I will tell you that flying as much as I do, one of the things that I do not do is when I'm on an airplane, especially for an extended period of time, right? Because I'm flying back and forth between the United States and Europe often. One of the things I don't do is I don't order cola. I don't get beer. I don't get wine on the airplane. I don't get tomato juice, nothing like that. I'm always water, because why? Your body has a tendency to feel dehydrated when you're traveling, especially when that pressure altitude starts hitting you. Yes, airplanes have a pressurized cabin that helps, but what happens when you're in that seated position for an extended period of time too is a lot of times that water just kind of moves into your legs, right? Gravity takes it down. It sits in the lowest part. You're not walking around. There is not a strong lymph system in your legs that pumps it back up. So I can remember this when I had a broken foot at one point, that the blood would always pool in my foot, and while I was on crutches, my foot would turn a very interesting tone of purple when I was in an upright position. And to make it go away, I would have to lay back down, elevate my foot, and sure enough, it would go back to a normal color. And the reason for that was because your legs, just moving your legs, just exerting those muscles, just that muscle movement is what pumps the blood back up through your leg. So it stands to say that it does the same thing with water, right? So if you're just sitting there in the same position for an extended period of time, water is going to seep into your legs. That's why it's always a good idea to wear things like compression stockings to practice the exercise movements that they'll sometimes teach you on those little channels on an airplane television, right? But you definitely want to pay attention to stuff like this. I always drink a lot of water when I'm traveling. For me, because I just don't like the feeling of being hydrated. So definitely a lot of merit in that. Checking on your supplements, they say. So this person recommends her patients to look into an immune boosting supplement before travel to ensure their system is in tip-top shape. All right, this is that's an interesting point, but I probably wouldn't just start popping vitamin C the day before. Vitamin C is one of those things that you kind of want to build up to a certain sufficient level in your body. I doubt that you want to just start overdoing it the day or two before and think, hey, I'm protected now, I just popped a vitamin. No, it's something that you should probably have a sufficient volume of in your body before you travel and expose yourself to all sorts of germs. But I will tell you, I am vaccinated. Yes, I am boosted. I have no opinions about people who do or do not get a vaccine. For me, it's all about just being able to travel back and forth from Europe, believe it or not. It doesn't matter. For me, it was all about accessibility to being able to visit family over there, right? But what I will say is I have never had COVID, and maybe I'm just an asymptomatic person, but I've never had COVID, and I am on an airplane every single month. Not only just once, but I'm on multiple flights every single month. I'm exposed to people. I practice jiu-jitsu on a regular basis. I'm always exposed to germs, and I just don't get sick like that. I haven't had COVID, and I know people who live very safe lifestyles, very sheltered. They stay in, they don't go out too much. They're very, very serious about this, and they have had it like twice, even if they're vaccinated. I can't understand it. But one of the biggest things is I try to watch what I eat. I try to stay healthy, and vitamin C is not something that you can just count on popping a pill or a supplement for the night before. Get enough sleep. That's the next point there. So sleep, it's really funny. What I do when I'm traveling internationally is I'm paying attention to what flights are when. So going over to Europe is usually a red-eye flight. Coming back from Europe is usually during the day. So I'll typically get home when I'm coming from Europe around 6 p.m., depending on whether or not I have a layover. And when I'm going there, I usually arrive somewhere around 6 or 7 a.m. in the morning, right? So that's a red-eye flight. That means it's overnight. So what I do, I always travel with a pillow. That's just me. I hate carrying it around. I don't like carrying a pillow all the time, but I carry a pillow with me, right? Because I want to be able to sleep comfortably, and it's not comfortable. And if I'm not flying first class, then I'm flying in coach, and it can be pretty uncomfortable in those seats. So at least if I have a pillow, I kind of tuck it into a corner right up against the window, and I just knock out. And that's what I do, is I will sleep on the way over to Europe, and on the way back, I will get an aisle seat, and I will just try to stay awake, just so I can move right into a sleep routine. So yes, getting enough sleep, but again, that's kind of a generalization, isn't it? Right? Just like taking vitamin C, just like hydrating, these are things that are just a part of life. You should always get enough sleep. You shouldn't wait till you're about to travel and say, hey, well, this week I'm going to be heading over to Europe, so I think the next 3 nights I'm going to go ahead and make sure I get 8 hours of sleep. Now, you should always really be focused on those things that are beneficial to your health, and sleep is obviously one of them. So, another one of those things that's kind of weird. Sneak in a pre-travel workout. Sure. If you're the type of person who has time to get a workout in before you travel, go to it. If not, then you're not going to change. Let's be honest. If you're somebody who just doesn't work out, the odds of you actually doing a workout before you travel, very slim, And if you're somebody who has to hit the gym 5 days a week like myself, then if it's a gym day, you're going to go to the gym unless that flight takes off at 7 a.m, which it doesn't. It's usually an afternoon flight. I'm going to the gym that day. So, that's just one of those things where it is what it is. You're either going to be that person or you're not, depending on, or regardless of traveling that day. And then the last thing is actually enjoy the process of planning a trip. So, this article, it's kind of trash to me. It's stupid. I mean, it's really just like painting the obvious facts. Yes, that doesn't make me a doctor. And sure, these are probably every doctor's opinions. Stay hydrated, get enough sleep, get some exercise, get some vitamin C in you. That doesn't seem like it. This individual sat down with a doctor. It really just seems like this person just kind of put this information together, and they're like, hey, cool, look, I know all these tips for, 5 things you should do before you travel. And this is according to a doctor. But I mean, honestly, what they're doing, they're just pointing out the obvious. If you're not drinking water in life and you're not making sure you get enough vitamins, be it B12, vitamin D, vitamin C, vitamin A, if you're not doing that, you're not taking care of yourself. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're not taking care of yourself. If you're not exercising, you're not taking care of yourself. So, articles like this, while they may be entertaining, to me, they're kind of like, all right, this is a waste of my time. Am I honestly going to get something out of this? Not really, because I'm just reading somebody who's stating the obvious. It's really just like a place filler, right? So let's go ahead and get rid of that one. I don't want to read it again. All right, article number 2. This one is actually published by NASDAQ, so this is a financial source. So now we've gone from an opinion piece with, quote unquote, a little bit of, authority behind it. If you actually use that doctor and you see that as credibility, for me, I'm just seeing it as stating the fact. I could read WebMD too, but, I don't see that as credible. Now, when I look at NASDAQ.com and I see a financial source or a financial reference talking about ways that you can budget during inflation, this for me holds more merit. All right. This for me holds a lot more merit. So if I start scrolling down through it, let's see what they say about this. U.S. inflation is not as bad or as chronic as Argentina's. All right. So this is a comparative piece, and when I did read this earlier, I'm like, this is odd, even though it is, a piece put together by someone who's actually got some authority in the financial arena. I didn't see this as, really a helpful, because one of the things that they're talking about is they're comparing the world. They're comparing, a lot of things to Argentina's way of dealing with inflation. And I'll give you a good example. Let's just kind of scroll down through here. Skip the stress. No, that's not the part that I was looking for. Hang on a second. Let's see where this is. Let's see if I can catch it. The biggest thing was noticing the part in the article that talked about, when things get bad for Argentinians, what do? They live it up. They go crazy. They have a good time. They try to live life to the fullest because they realize that they're not saving. All right. So here's what it says. Argentines tend to spend their paychecks as soon as they come in, filling bars and restaurants, generally living for the moment. It's macroeconomic. YOLO. Come on. I mean, that's such a weird thing to say, right? Does anybody agree with me? That's such a weird thing to say. Now, this person starts off by saying, I heard a podcast last week about how runaway inflation in Argentina has caused everyone to party more. And why they say is when inflation gets really bad, there's no reason to save cash for a later date since it will only get less valuable. That's just stupid. I hate to say it. So again, I'm looking at these things, and these are kind of the conversations that I'm having in my brain. At first I see the article and I'm like, hey, cool. This is by NASDAQ. It's a travel article produced by NASDAQ.com. There should be some, important information in here. I mean, think about the title. You can still travel on a budget during inflation. And this is how it kicks off the article, is by talking about that. Yes, sure. Having $100,000 sitting in your bank account in a year from now, if the rates continue to do what they're doing, if inflation continues to soar out of control like it has been, yes, that money's going to have less value. But I don't think anybody has ever recommended that an entire culture just go out and they party it up. They live life to the fullest. Why? Because their money is going to be gone soon anyways. That makes absolute no sense, right? There's a lot of things you can do with that money still. You can pump them into something that actually does hold value, maybe even something that grows in value. There are certain industries that even grow and profit during inflation. So one of the last things that anybody should ever be guiding you on doing is just living it like there's no tomorrow during a financially difficult time, right? So they talk about knowing how prices have travel prices have been changing. And they say it's easy to talk about travel inflation like it's some monolithic force, but it's just the law of supply and demand playing out like it always does. And it hasn't been affecting every aspect of travel the same way. And then it goes into a chart that's produced by NerdWallet. Now, I actually like reading articles published by NerdWallet because NerdWallet is actually a pretty good source of information. If you're looking for the how-to on how to do something very specific, it might have something to do with credit card miles, how to cash in on Sky miles, what's the best way to do this, what's the best way to do that. NerdWallet is actually a really good source for that information. It seems to me NerdWallet is a lot less opinionated and a lot more, let me show you how this works. And we've sent people into the field, we've tested this process, and this is what gained the best results. So I actually do like the information they put out. NASDAQ, based on this article, I wouldn't be reading too much about it, right? But what does it say? This chart shows us that the prices and the industries of flights, car rentals, hotels, and food away from home have all grown pretty substantially since pre-COVID times. Now, this is actually April 2020. April 2020, March 2020 is actually the part where COVID was really taking off. And how do I know that? Because that's when I broke my foot. It was in March of 2020. And that's when I ended up being couch ridden for 3 months. And it couldn't have come at a better time because, work decided we're all going to work from home. And, I wasn't doing anything anyway. So if anything, that's when I needed to be sitting on my butt just doing nothing. So it came at a perfect time, to be honest with you. And according to this chart, one of the things that really hasn't changed significantly, even though it has grown by as much as, 18%, is the cost of food away from home. Whereas other industries, such as the flights, the hotels, and especially car rentals have jumped significantly. Now, when I'm looking at this chart, I see that there was a peak in the summer of 2021. Yes, everybody knew that. And as a matter of fact, it says up 80% here, but the cost of renting a car in some areas had jumped as high as 175%, which is insane, right? And the reason why that was is because during the time of COVID, all of these car rental agencies had an entire fleet of cars that were just sitting there doing nothing. And so to be able to survive during that time, what a lot of these agencies did was they sold off their fleets, leaving them very, very limited numbers remaining, right? Because who was able to forecast it at that time? If you were a car rental agency and you had 5,000 cars in your fleet and COVID is hitting, COVID's soaring, the streets are empty, nobody's traveling, nobody's allowed to travel, and you not knowing when the end is in sight could seem like a pretty, I don't know, just really sad thing, right? It's something that there's no, it's an open-ended thing. It's got to be very discouraging at that point because you don't know when the end is in sight. So in order to make ends meet, to keep your company afloat, you start selling off your fleet. And now as 2021 starts to pick back up or come to an end, and then the spring of 2022 starts kicking in, we see that all of a sudden travel's starting to pick back up. And honestly, I think people at this point, they just don't care. They're like, screw this, man. We are never going through that again. COVID or not, I'm traveling. And that's why we saw that high demand. So yeah, it was ridiculous. You could go for an economy car in Charlotte, North Carolina. It might cost you $700 for the week. Whereas a year and a half prior to that, it would have cost you $350 for the week. It was insane how much those prices had risen, but they did. And, everybody wrote it out. If you could afford to rent a car at the time, you rented a car. If you couldn't, then you just found a way around it. Or maybe you just use your own vehicle and you didn't fly as much and you just decided to take a road trip. People are resilient. They'll find ways around it. Nobody's going to let themselves be beat down too long. And I think that's what COVID did, is it really showed people you have a preference and you can either be out there traveling and take the risks, or you could bottle yourself up in your house. You could always wear the mask. You could just be nervous about everything all the time. And I think the majority of people have said, you know what, I'm going to roll the dice. I'm going to take a chance because the science is coming back and showing us that it's never been as significant as we played it out to be. Although, who really can blame them for raising the flags early on when you didn't know what you're dealing with? It's better to be overly cautious, I would think, And that's what happens. Nobody could foresee that. But that's why those car prices skyrocketed. So going down through this article a little bit more, lock in the flexible prices, trying to figure out whether it's a good time to book travel, avoid future price hikes is like trying to figure out whether it's a good time to buy stocks. The truth is that nobody knows. Yet travel bookings differ from investment in a crucial way that can often be canceled or rebooked if prices drop. Well, it's a very interesting way to put it. It's true. Honestly, I kind of find that there's really no great time to buy plane tickets, to book plane tickets. They do say, industry experts say that somewhere around 75 days out from your travel time is the best time to actually book your tickets. And I've just planned mine. I've just booked mine for going to Europe in the Christmas time now, because I know based on this last summer when I paid $1,200 for a ticket, when I usually pay $600 for that same time frame, that prices are going to soar. So if I would have waited another, month and a half, and I would have got to the end of November and tried to book my ticket at that point, I would have had a very rude awakening. Not only would I have probably seen that there is a significantly less or fewer number of seats available, but now the prices are going to be much, much higher than they were if I would have bought them when I did, which was this week, So you always got to pay attention to that. Yes, things are cyclical, right? And if you pay attention to travel, you'll notice that during the Christmas time frame, essentially base it on a child's school calendar. If school's out during the week of Thanksgiving, if it's out during Christmas time for 2 weeks, if it's out for 6 to 8 weeks during the summer, those are the time frames that you can expect there to be a high cycle in travel, right? Because parents, yes, they'll travel throughout the year, especially single people, couples without children, they'll travel throughout the year. They'll find Martin Luther King weekend, Columbus Day weekend, Memorial Day weekend, they'll find those times and they'll go somewhere, and not even in, sometimes in between, they'll just take vacation in the middle of March, April, May, whenever, and they'll go somewhere, because they have that kind of freedom. But if you're a parent and you have children, then you don't really have the freedom to go anywhere long distance, especially flying, unless that kid has, that time off of school. So yeah, that is true. I definitely agree with them. It's a little bit different. And now they offer insurances where you could actually, if you have to cancel for some reason, you can claim that money and get that lost money back, or you can actually get booking insurance when you go through like Expedia or any of these booking agencies, where they'll say, if you have to cancel last minute, this will allow you to do it. And then it usually costs somewhere around, $10 to $30 just for that ticket. Is it worth it to get it? It depends. If you think there's a high chance that you might actually be canceled, sure. If a lot of times I just need to book that ticket because the price is right, but I don't know 100% that I'm going to get that time off of work, of course I'm going to get the insurance, But if I know I have that time and the price is right, I'm going for it. And if it's 5 weeks out, if it's 7 weeks out, if it's 3 months out, it doesn't matter. I'm going when that ticket's the best. But yeah, it's difficult to forecast when the best time to buy is. I will be honest with you there. So all in all, this article, it's okay. It's one of those kind of middle of the road ones. I didn't like the first article that much because it seemed too much of an opinion piece, and they tried to substantiate themselves by using common sense and saying that according to a doctor. Really, it's just according to them, and they just did a little bit of research. Now with this one, I'm like, it's a weird way to kick off an article. It's a weird way to kick off the news by talking about this whole Argentine thing. Like, was that even necessary? It kind of discredits the article, if you ask me. But, there was some decent points in it, I guess, if I really wanted to look into it. But mostly, I don't think I would go get my advice from a NASDAQ.com article on how to travel on a budget. Honestly, I would take up more credible sources. I would take up more serious research than just blog articles. All right, so let's get rid of that and let's go to our third and final news article. And this is one I actually read this morning. Pretty sad to me because, if you're no stranger to the news and you've been keeping up on things, then you have seen a lot of information about crime rising across these large cities in the United States. And New York City is definitely one of those hubs. The article talks a lot about, the danger of riding on the subway now. Like, I can't even believe it. When you think back, if you're old enough to think back to the way New York was in the 70s and 80s, it had really gone downhill. It's probably like a lot of cities. I'm sure there was a lot of cities that were going downhill. And then under the right leadership, crime started coming under control. The money started going back into important industries like probably waste removal to make sure the city stays clean, make sure there's plenty of services there that could actually clean up after, or clean up messes around the city, just basically keeping the city clean, making sure that crime stays low by putting more police on the streets, making sure that policies are adjusted so that people are actually arrested and held accountable for crime. When you start taking care of things, things start looking like they're taken care of. And honestly, the way that things have been going the last few years, there's a huge level of doubt in my mind that I would ever want to travel to any of these big cities or waste my travel time going to these big cities. When you read this article, the saddest thing is the way people talk about how they have to adjust their businesses. These restaurants that have been staying open until 2 a.m. or 1 a.m., midnight, now can't find enough waiters and waitresses and servers to work there because they're all afraid to go home at 12 a.m. because they're afraid of getting mugged. They're afraid of getting stabbed on the subway. They're afraid of this and that. That's just not the way things should be. So I'm not going to sit here and cast an ominous shadow on travel to New York City. But what I would say is if you're paying attention to this, then a lot of these articles are coming up about, how dangerous Chicago's becoming, how dangerous New Orleans has become, how dangerous, New York City has become. And then conversely, there's other cities, large cities that have a high level of law and order, like Miami, that are actually improving over time. Miami, I've seen recently, is one of the safest large cities in the United States right now. That's fantastic. And a lot of that is due to, the society there, the people that live there and what they support, the political leaders, obviously. Politics comes down to being the source of a lot of these problems or a lot of these solutions. As much as I hate to talk about politics, they are often behind the solution or behind the problem. And that's a sad thing, But New York City, I love the city. I've been there plenty of times. I mean, I've stayed there plenty of times. I've traveled there. I've worked there. It is a great city when it's the right atmosphere, when it's the right time, when crime is under control, when the subways are clean, the police presence is abundant. When the city has its crap together, it's a great place to visit. It's a great place to be. But unfortunately, today, a lot of these large cities are almost not worth investing your travel time into. And honestly, if I was going to give you some kind of opinion on the matter, I would say that right now is just not the time that you want to be traveling to places like New York, to Chicago. And it's really sad, because Chicago has one of the best Christmas markets in the United States, but they're not the only city that does. Salt Lake City supposedly has a pretty large Christmas market as well. So you can always adjust, use this time to go visit other areas, visit safer areas. Always consider your safety, no matter what you're doing, where you are. If you're ever traveling somewhere, don't travel to a location where your safety is in question. Okay. And what I would say about New York, and this is strictly coming from Eric Allen, I would say don't waste your time. Honestly, the lack of tourism in the city is going to hopefully be enough of an encouraging factor for the leaders of that city to get their act together. If they start seeing that the city is being significantly impacted by a lack of tourism and people are moving out and things are changing, crime is rising, then that's just going to foster in a new climate change, which could be new leadership. And new leadership hopefully has that sense of, all right, we need to get things under control. And I don't care what the political party is. For me, it's mostly important that the person in that position does their job and they do it well and they look after the people, their constituents, right? All right. So hopefully this was enough for you today. This is already 32 minutes into this, and I just want to leave you with that. But that's what we're going to do. We're just going to keep digging into these news articles because honestly, they're fascinating to me. And I can't read these travel news articles without having some kind of internal dialogue or some kind of opinion about them. So I hope this helps. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll see you again next time. Travel safe.